The Fantasy Fullback Dive is thrilled to welcome on for a second time now the new Roto World writer. He's the co-host of the Living the Stream podcast with JJ Zachariason, owner of both the Draft Day Consultants and, according to him, some very low T and some new flow since the last time I saw you. Looking fantastic there. Mr. Denny Carter, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much. I appreciate you having me on. And even more importantly, I appreciate you complimenting my hair because I'm feeling very self-conscious about the mullet back here.
It's fantastic, Logs, man. You can't feel self-conscious about that. You got to let it rip. I love it. How long's that been? How long's that kind of created? Taken to create there?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I usually get a haircut every 3 to 4 months, and so I get it really short on the sides, like super short, and then kind of trimmed on the top. Nice. It's been 10 months now.
Wow.
And so, but when I tell people that, their initial reaction is always, dude, how is it not longer than that? It's been 10. Right. I said, because it started, the side started like 4 millimeters long. So,
yeah, right. Are you planning to just let it go for another like 10 months and just see how long this thing rips?
Man, I don't know. I don't know if I can deal with it. It's starting to get annoying, the other day, I was telling someone the other day I was shaving, and you bent over the sink, and I couldn't shave properly because my damn hair was in my face, like on my cheeks. So out of necessity, I had to figure out how to tie my hair back in order to shave. And I had no idea what I was doing. I have a little bit of practice with my 4-year-old daughter, a little bit. Usually she screams because I don't know how to do it correctly, so I end up yanking her hair accidentally. It makes me feel horrible, but I managed, and I had my hair in a ponytail while I shaved.
Wow, that would be a great image. I just pictured it right now. I'm sure that was fantastic. But yeah, so we're here just, again, the part of the 2020 Fantasy Wolves series, and it's kind of just as expected with Denny. You have such unique, varied content all throughout the industry, so we couldn't really lock down I'm trying to give the agenda here, a clear-cut feature. We've got some different players you've been writing about. We got some prop bets you've been writing about. We got kickers, of course. When it comes to Denny, you got to get kickers in there. Question about late-round tight ends. So we're going to be all over the place, but it's certainly going to be some useful information. Last time we had you on, I think it's been a couple of years now, but it was a fantastic pod. Our listeners loved it, so we're thrilled you're willing to come back on and join the show, man. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, as long as we can talk kickers, that's my main requirement with podcasts. My lawyers won't sign on to anything if we're not talking about kickers.
Exactly. So yeah, we made sure that's probably the most loaded segment we have, like 3 follow-up questions about kickers, and you're as good as they come in the industry on that. But before we dive into those player-specific questions, as we do with every Wolf, we like to kind of pick your brain a little bit, your process and all that good stuff. And I always just start with, what's kind of been your path into the fantasy industry? When did you get involved, and what kind of advice do you have for others looking to break into the space?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that lately after signing on with Roto World a couple weeks ago, and this is my second week now working for them, and I was thinking about how I got here. Mostly I had questions that I wanted to answer about certain players or certain teams, or maybe a certain strategy, whether it's in season or draft strategy. And I had questions about those things, so I would do the homework, come up with some sort of write-up, trying to put my thoughts on paper, and eventually I said, I want to publish this. I would like to get this out there. And it wasn't as a big a step for me, maybe because I come from a journalism background. I'm used to getting things published. I don't write unless it's going to be published. So I figured, well, I might as well do that with this fantasy stuff. And a couple guys were really nice to let me start writing for them, including Chet Gresham at the Fake Football back in the day, and Josh Moore at 4for4.com. And then things you kind of snowball. People ask you to write for them. You ask to write for people, and eventually you're writing for 15 publications. You can't even keep track. So that's how I started.
Awesome. Yeah, just getting out there as much as you can, and now you're one of the premier powerhouses everybody recognizes in Roto World.
I was just going to say, just if I could offer just one piece of advice for new people, it would be to answer the questions that you have in a comprehensive, in-depth way, and then because you know that other people have those same questions, and it could be a very small question about a player, a situation, an offense, whatever. If you answer it in a way that will make sense to people, whether they agree or disagree, people will want to read that.
Exactly. Yeah. The way you're framing that too is if you approach it as a question that you're researching, you're more likely to at least consider both sides while you answer it too, which is always my favorite articles, when you can kind of see both sides. And then ultimately I like when the author also makes a decision, whether I agree with it or not too. So I've noticed that in your analysis. I think on the last podcast I had you on, I kind of shouted out what drew me to you. You had an article about like Mark Trestman way back in the day,
I
where
did, yeah.
you dug into like Matt Forte is going to blow up. And he did. He had like, I think 100 catches that year. And that was like, damn, this fantasy analysis, it was like one of my first or second years into it. It can really get deep. And that's what I loved about it.
Cool.
So you still continue to bring it. So I'll always remember that one. That was one of my first introductions.
Nice, man. That was a long time ago, man. That was 7 years ago or something. And yeah, always go with Trestman's running backs. That's the key.
Exactly. And you also mentioned too that you run the draft day consultants. When did that kind of start? What are some different services and things you guys offer there?
Yeah, draftdayconsultants.com. We've been around. This will be our 7th season, and we offer a range of services. We offer a pre-draft consultation where a client will Zoom or Skype or smoke signal with our consultants and talk with them about how they want to approach the draft. And then the consultant will give some advice based on league scoring, league settings, positions, whatever. If it's a keeper league, that obviously changes the formula for how you approach a draft. So lots of pre-draft stuff, in the early parts of August. In draft is our most popular service. That's where during a remote draft, usually, although I do have stories about live drafts, people secretly texting awesome. Consultants to ask them questions. That's always fun. But the in draft is just us saying, here's what I would do with this pick, and let's queue up this person, let's queue up this defense, whatever it is, later in the draft. Let's get you set. And if the person doesn't feel comfortable, it's their team. We're just offering our advice during the draft. And then finally we have season-long consultation, where it's basically helping you work the waiver wire. And that has proven, I think, a tremendous value for clients who sign up for it. It's not nearly as common as in draft, because I think people like to do that part themselves. But I would say this year, if there truly is a season this year, working the waiver wire is going to take on way more importance than usual. You're going to have to make waiver wire moves that you would have never dreamed of in previous seasons. And the quicker you are with that, and the more informed you are about who's up next, who would get opportunity if this guy is put on the COVID IR, that it's going to add a layer of complexity to working the waiver wire that we can't even wrap our heads around it right now. It's going to take some time for us to get used to. So I would say, in a non-biased way, I would say our season-long package is more important than ever, folks.
Absolutely. It is going to be a extremely strange year. And a new question I kind of added to the list for our future Wolves, because it is, especially, even today as we're recording, the MLB, the Marlins whole thing is going down, and who knows what the hell's going to happen. So maybe it's a doomsday and just season's canceled at some point is worst case, but let's kind of hypothetically say, we get a season. As you're entering it, you just mentioned some of the in-season complications that are no doubt going to arise, and why, the consultant service would be so useful for an in-season package. But while you're approaching the season, has the COVID-19 impacted your rankings and process at all as you're going into it?
I think at this point, you just have to assume 16 games for everybody still, until we start getting news in August about certain players being, testing positive. Then I think we just have to assume that. What do you think?
I agree. It's what I'm kind of I've seen a lot of issues, and I had a great podcast that Scott Barrett and Sigmund Bloom had recently. I was listening to, and they were talking also about kind of the rookies and the learning curve, and with no OTAs and the importance of continuity and things like that. And I have that. I was so high on Clyde Edwards-Helaire for an example. Like I thought it was the perfect landing spot, and I still do. I really like a lot about it. But is he going to now take, it was already going to be a little bit of a wait to get to him, and now is it going to take even more? And now can I burn my third round pick on him? If I'm going to have to wait, 7-8 games, am I still going to be in contention? So I don't know. And do I just stick with my original gut? Am I adjusting it? I'm kind of starting to lean that way, that especially for complex roles and receivers on new teams and things like that, where rapport is important. I am starting to bump them down just a little bit and bump up the people that have that continuity, the Tyreek Hills and the Pat Mahomes and things. I don't know. Are you reacting in that sense at all? Like bumping people down?
I think that's a fair assessment, and I think the same goes maybe for rookie quarterbacks as well. Not that in a one quarterback league you usually wouldn't have to take Tua at any point, but maybe the lack of reps means that he's for super flex purposes and for 2 QB purposes, maybe that means that he will start the season on the bench. And maybe it'll take some more time than we would have thought. In Superflex, he's been a pretty good target really late in drafts, because with a normal situation, you would imagine that the Dolphins would be desperate to give him the ball week 1. But I don't think that you can bank on that now.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. A huge new layer of risk added. I'm just going to. And so in general, obviously COVID's kind of impacted our process this year in certain ways, like we're talking about. But in general, do you ever kind of, when you're just a new season's kind of hitting, February hits, it's the end of the year. Do you have any type of like routines or practices you follow when you're kind of beginning to develop your evaluations and rankings?
Yeah, I don't usually start that until much later in the year, when we're talking about seasonal leagues, because unless you are heavy into best ball, things change so much from the end of one season to the beginning of the next. I mean, things even change. We spend so much time in June and July hammering out exactly how we feel about a certain offense or a certain running back or receiver situation, and by the end of August, you look back at that analysis and you think, well, that was all for naught. Like that, like all of that is now out the window because of this injury or this bit of news or a trade, before the season. Just something happens. Things happen that completely void out everything that we worked on for months. So I would say I wait until at least mid to late July to really look at especially players who I believe are being undervalued or overvalued, based almost strictly on likely volume. If I see a player going high up in the draft where I can't quite figure out where his opportunity is going to come from, even if it's a great, productive, efficient player, if I can't figure out where the opportunity is going to come from, I'm skeptical. And then vice versa, if I see someone later in the draft where I say, wait a second, this receiver, this running back, usually we're talking about receivers, honestly, but has more than enough cushion here from where he's being drafted. Why is he being taken in the 7th when he's probably going to see more volume of opportunity than the guy going 2 rounds ahead of him? And so those are the things I try to look at, try to focus on in the summer.
I feel like you just kind of answered the next question I have on here, where there's all these different factors to fantasy success. And to me, whether it's talent, opportunity, as you just said, surrounding talent and the scheme, all different factors. To you, is it just, opportunity is the first one, and that's really the driver no matter what?
Yeah. I don't trust myself to evaluate talent. And in the end, I think that banking on that is puts a lot of confidence in something that can be really wrong,
Yeah.
and that is your subjective analysis of a player. And a lot of times we say, well, this guy, this guy's so good. He's so good, and everybody can see it. Like if you've ever watched
Mhm.
football, you can say, oh, this guy's good. But if his coaches don't agree, and if they don't act accordingly, then what does it matter? Like, who cares that he's good? He's on the bench, Like we we went through this. The ultimate example of this, I think, was when we all knew that Jamal Charles was like
Right.
this amazing back that just needed to be unleashed, and he sat behind Thomas Jones, and you're
Oh,
just like, oh, so it does. So wait, that was my first kind of understanding that, like, oh, it doesn't matter what I think
yeah.
about the player.
Exactly. No, totally. It's so frustrating too when we all see how talented someone is and they just rot behind
Yeah,
them. When you are forming that kind of talent evaluation, I'm sure you're well aware of that whole Twitter debate, analytics versus film, and how
yeah.
you got to form your opinion with one or the other. Do you buy that, or do you lean one way versus the other, or how do you kind of form your opinion on the player and their abilities?
I tend to, for better or worse, probably for worse, I tend to look at everything uh, with very few shades of gray. Things
Mm,
are black and white to me. And so I see a lot of, this question has been talked about for a long time, and rightfully so. I mean, it's an interesting topic, and it's one that determines, a lot about the direction of the fantasy industry. So it's worth discussing. I see a lot of answers that are something like, well, if you throw in a little film and a little numbers, then that's the best. That's the best. You mix it up, and that's the best. And that answer tends to make everybody happy. Rightfully
mm,
so. I get, you got my stuff, you got his stuff. Everybody's validated. But honestly, I really believe that a strict numbers based approach to fantasy football in the long run, maybe not player by player every single season, but in the long run, you're going to have
mm.
more success doing that. I've talked before about, I wish I could stop watching the
Yeah.
games, because I believe that watching the games, at least for me, speaking just for myself, I believe that watching the games contaminates the way that I
Mm.
play the game, because I uh, I see a player make an incredible catch or something, and that does, as a human, that affects the way that I see that player. So when I see that player on the waiver wire, or I'm trying to acquire him via trade, I'm thinking about that catch, but I'm not thinking about the fact that he only had 4 targets, that
Right.
in that game. So that's the sort of thing that I think it can lead you astray.
And I think a good example of that, a player we're going to be talking about in a few, like Marquise Brown, week one. It's like, this guy is so fucking, oh my God, like he's going to do this every week, even though he was on the field for, I think, like 6 plays. And I think he had like 4 catches on those 6 plays. It was something insane. Like if
Yes,
you looked at the snaps, you realize, okay, I don't know if I should go all in and blow my entire waiver wire budget right now. But
that's right.
man, he's getting such good separation and blowing through the field. Like
Hmm.
he's got to be the next big thing. So that's a great example of it. Is there any types of stats or like analytics that you kind of lean to as, whether it's yards per route run or different types of analytics? Is there any that you definitely look at every single year, no matter what?
Hmm. Yards per route run is definitely a good one. It's a very sticky stat that it's worth looking at for anybody, really. Uh, you know, for for pass catchers and quarterbacks, I tend to look at touchdown rate and whether it was low or high the previous year. Whether we can expect some sort of adjustment in the following year, some sort of regression. So, if a wide receiver usually has a touchdown rate of, I don't know, 12%, and the previous season he had an 18% touchdown rate, that rings some alarms for me. It says, okay, well, where is he? How is he being valued on the basis of an 18% touchdown rate? Because that's not going to happen again.
Right.
That, I mean, for most players, it doesn't, at least. And so that, yeah, I mean, touchdown rate is a big one. I'm trying to think of some others. I mean, if you look at, routes run for tight ends, I think that's a big. The reason that's on the top of my mind because I did a podcast on Friday where we talked about tight ends and the fact that a lot of tight ends who make plays when they're called upon are not running that many routes, and in the end, route running is the only way. And it sounds simple, but it's the only way that you're ever going to score points is if you're actually running a route. So those sort of things I really do focus on.
Absolutely. And the last couple here before we move into this feature segment, the smorgasbord here is any tools or, other sites or what it might be that you just kind of consider a game changer you always look at?
RotoViz tools are
Yeah.
pretty incredible. I use RotoViz tools more than any, and I'm not paid by RotoViz. Like
Yeah.
I'm a fan, and I've written for them a few times using their tools, and it gives you so much fodder to think about and to consider, and it's also incredibly helpful. I actually use their range of outcomes tool for my annual fantasy equity report, fantasy equity score report, and I use that along with projections that I make and to create the report. And finding a player's range of outcomes, I think, is incredibly helpful in understanding what his floor might be and what his ceiling might be, instead of just kind of the median projection of what we're looking at. So yeah, I mean, all those tools at RotoViz are pretty cool.
I think, that's almost everyone. It might be batting 100% there. Like everybody always, when I ask that one, RotoViz, it's my first year actually subbing to it. And I just am kicking myself for not doing it sooner. Like it's a playground. The first day I did it, I literally sat at my computer, I think for 12 straight hours and was like, oh my God.
Yes.
And you just discover something new every time. It's so much fun.
Yeah, it really, really is. I mean, I'm not a super techie guy, but as soon as I figure out these tools, I'm hooked. Yeah.
Exactly. And the last one here is, what about other analysts that that you just really respect? I'm sure our listeners have probably heard of them, but it's always good just kind of shout out a few names that wolves you kind of consider that our listeners got to follow if they're not already.
That guy JJ, he's okay. He's pretty good. No, JJ thinks so analytically about the game, about everything, He's a supremely analytical guy. And I envy that about him. I think that he is just so incredibly level-headed, that it serves him well in fantasy football because he doesn't tilt one way or the other. He doesn't get too down and he doesn't get too up, and he doesn't get rattled, by anything that's happening. He just has this very steady approach, and it serves him well. I've played with him in leagues for years and years, and he's always near the top. So JJ's one. Rich Rebar has a beautiful mind, fantasy football beautiful mind. I just picture him like Russell Crowe, just drawing on chalkboards, drawing on windows in restaurants. And Rich has a way of talking about the game that just really simplifies everything in a way that I'm like, I hear him talk, or I'll chat with him, and I'm like, oh God, man, you just broke it down. Like I've been thinking about that player, that offense for like a week, and you just broke it down. So yeah, Rich's advice is invaluable. Some other guys, TJ Hernandez at 4for4. I think he has a really sharp way of looking at the game, and Chris Raybon at the network.
The Action Network? Yeah,
the
Action Network, right?
Yeah,
he's great.
I blanked there. Yeah, I just talked to Chris on Friday. Chris Raybon is great. He was at a draft day consultant, believe it or not, along with TJ and Rich, and man, when I look back at our 2015, 2016 lineup at draft day consultants had guys who like at the top of the industry now. So we were cooking that year, Chris is fun and funny about how he looks at the game, but he's also can rattle off stats and hit you with them, at one after the other, and not even blink. It's like
Yeah.
not even hard for him to remember. Again, like his brain works in like a different way, and I'm always impressed.
That's awesome. Yeah. Again, all those guys, especially Rich and JJ, like you just hear these names over and over. I think I've had 8, 9, 10 Wolves at this point this summer, and the same 2, 3 people always get shouted out along with some others. It's funny. You got to make sure if you're still somehow not following some of those names that you just keep hearing over and over. Listeners, they're all fantastic, and I'm hoping to get some of them on by the end of the summer too. It's always good to pick their brains as well. But yeah, so now we're moving into part 2, that kind of featured segment, that mismatch of a bunch of different stuff here. And I think we just dive right in. We previewed him already. Marquise Brown, you've been doing a great series over at 4 for 4. We kind of pick a specific player. You talk about whether you like them at their price, you dislike them at their price, and project why you have that way. And they've been great. You've been really digging in deep.
Thank you.
I love that series. And I actually had to change my script late here today because you wrote one on Marvin Jones. Our next question, I can't wait to talk about him too. We haven't really talked about him, but let's start with Marquise Brown. The title, he's a risky bet for 2020. And lately, I feel like all I've been seeing is positive praise on him. So it's definitely good to at least get a little bit of a pump the brakes to present another type of viewpoint on here. So what do you think makes him a risky bet in 2020? Why aren't you drinking the Kool-Aid as much as some others maybe?
Sure. I felt like a little bit of a hypocrite because 2 weeks ago I wrote a piece about how I like him to go over his his prop bet for receiving yardage this year, which I think is 800 yards.
Yeah.
I'll check that real quick here, but
I think it's 800. Yeah, is right. I'm pretty sure 800 and a half, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like so here's what I wrote. I said, I like Brown to go over his prop of 800 and a half receiving yards this season, though that's hardly a tall task. 42 receivers went for more than 800 yards last year. So, I believe that he will do that, but he's being drafted in a place where if he doesn't do that, he'll be a disastrous pick this year. I call him risky because I think if you are someone who is drafting running backs and tight ends and quarterbacks earlier than usual, earlier than most people, and you look at Marquise Brown and you say, that's my wide receiver too. I'm going to use my first 2 picks on running backs. I'm going to grab an elite tight end, Andrews or something. And then, depending on the kind of league you're in, you can get a top quarterback. And then you get down into the, where's he going? The 7th or 8th round?
Yeah, right around there.
And then, I'm going. So Brown he's still going to have these spike weeks, which is great, but it's probably not going to be a smoothed out sort of production that you want from your wide receiver 2. Now, if you draft him as your wide receiver 4 or 5, then I think that's the play, because you don't have to have him. You don't have to plug him in. You can, exploit his good matchups. This does hinge on the Ravens offense continuing to be incredibly run heavy. They were the run heaviest offense in the league last year. 54% of their plays, of their offensive snaps were rushes. That might come back, a little bit this year, maybe to more of a 50-50 split, but any offense that's led by Lamar Jackson is going to be run heavy.
Right.
And being the number 2 option on a run heavy offense, for fantasy purposes, it's not always great. I mean, you think about like Tyler Lockett back when Doug Baldwin was in Seattle, and Seattle's super run heavy back then, still always, I guess. In 150 years, they'll still be running the ball.
Unfortunately, yeah.
But Tyler Lockett, seemed like a solid pick, but because he's the number 2 receiver, but the number 2 receiver on a run heavy team is like the number 4 receiver really on a pass heavy team. So that's how I see Brown. I do like him if you don't need him as your wide receiver too.
Yeah, that is a fantastic point. If you can plug him into the flex those weeks where it is projected to be a little bit of a shootout, maybe they're facing the Chiefs and it's like, all right, they're going to have to keep the air under the ball. Rich, I was listening to one with him, and he was on Fitz on Fantasy, and he made a take that I really liked at first, because he was saying, well, look at that playoff game where things didn't go according to play. This was like the perfect season for the Ravens. And, he's still, Lamar Jackson went, crazy, but look at that playoff game where things went awry and he still had 365 throwing and 143 rushing. And then you look at Marquise Brown, his best game, 7 for 126. Like, what if it just doesn't go as smoothly for the Ravens? I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I can see that ceiling. And it's a really good point by Rich, but then it's also like, they added Calais Campbell and Patrick Quinn with the first-round pick and Derek Wolfe, and that defense still looks pretty damn good. And I don't know. I don't see. I'm leaning to your side on this one too, where it's just like I'd love that narrative of backyard ball with Lamar Jackson every week. It'd be insane.
That'd be awesome.
We'd all love it.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, I don't know. I don't see it either. The only other thing I did read a lot of reports coming in this offseason where he was never fully healthy last year, and now he just is training so much harder. He's added a bunch of muscle, whether he keeps the speed or not. Just everyone's saying he's kind of like grown into his body a little bit more because he looks like a pipsqueak. Honestly, at times you see his picture, he's like, this guy is tiny. How's he in the NFL? So if he's in that, if he was getting separation the way he was when he wasn't fully healthy, maybe he's going to be one of those guys that just, even on such low volume, you get one of those huge plays, kind of like Tyreek Hill when he was a rookie for that kind of crazy stretch. He only needed 2 or 3 plays to change the game. There is that ceiling, but I think I'm leaning with you on this one. I don't know if I'm touching him too much.
I just don't think that he is a great target for running back heavy teams. But yeah, that Tennessee game, in that Tennessee game last year in the playoffs, Brown ran 66 pass routes. He was in on 85% of the Ravens snaps, and he had 11 targets. So it's if we could get something even resembling that throughout the year, man, you're talking about Brown as like a wide receiver 1.
Exactly. Unfortunately, I don't expect it. I bet you could do like that math out, like 66 routes. It probably took him like 11 weeks of the season to hit 66 routes as compared to that one game. You know what I mean? Right. Like it was wild there. But the wide receiver that, you are high on, and I'd rather have than Marquise Brown too at cost right now, Marvin Jones, we both fully agree on, and we haven't had much pod material on this guy at all, but you called him a must draft at his current ADP. So what do you like so much about Marvin Jones? I'm on board too, but I'd love to hear what you say about him.
Yeah, it's just, like I was talking about earlier, opportunity. He had 7.5 targets per game before Stafford went down last year. That passing offense in Detroit was just ripping opposing secondaries week after week. Jones will continue to benefit from teams, shading coverage and leaning toward shutting down Kenny Golladay. And that leaves Jones in a really good spot. And Stafford obviously knows how to exploit that sort of matchup, as he did a lot last year. Another thing that really surprised me, because I think we all remember Marvin Jones's big game against the Vikings. He caught 4 touchdowns, 10 passes in that game. I thought, just from that game, I thought, okay, well, I'm going to look into this. I'm sure it'll be touchdown regression the wrong way in 2020, but in fact, it's not. It would not be. His career rate is around 12%, and last year was 9%. So it's not a huge gap, but it's not a situation where he had an unreasonable number of touchdowns, and that's why he was thriving, as a fantasy player while Stafford was in for half the season last year. So I think where he's going in the draft, he's certainly the most appealing wide receiver in that part of the draft. And I think that no matter how you build your lineup, it makes sense to take him. It's a luxury to have him as your wide receiver 4. I also think if you just hammer running back early and often, and you get him as your wide receiver 2 or 3, I think that's fine too.
And he's kind of one of the reasons I almost exclusively do hammer running back. You never want to lock yourself into a strategy, but when you can get him, you have him right here in your article. He's being taken as the wide receiver 39. So, 7, 8, sometimes even round 9. I think I got him in the Scott Fishbowl round like 12 or something crazy like that. And I love the point you make here too, is the disparity between him and Kenny Golladay. 10 fantasy points, even before that blow up, like 47 targets for Jones to 55 for Golladay. The only huge disparity here right now is Galladay's going early round 3, sometimes round 2, and you can get Jones 6-7 rounds later. So I mean, I'm not an anti-Golladay. I love Golladay. He's a beast, and maybe he takes his game to another level. But that lack of disparity is kind of crazy for the way they're being priced. So I'm all with you.
Yeah, I think it could be. We could see a scenario pretty easily this year where Marvin Jones ends up with like 15 fewer targets than Kenny Golladay. So we're talking about, around 1 per game.
Right.
If fewer. Are they the kind of targets that Golladay will get? Those big splash kind of opportunities that Golladay gets? No. But that's why one is going in the second or third round and one's going in the middle of the draft.
Yeah, but they also too the red zone chemistry between him and Stafford, like he doesn't get quite the big play, but for whatever reason he's got that great body control. Even when he was with Cincinnati, like he's just so acrobatic with his body that he still gets some pretty valuable volume, even if it's a little bit less. So I'm with you. I'm all about that price, and I'm taking him every draft too. He's a must buy, regardless of how you've composed your team up to that point. So I love it. You already kind of hinted at your prop bet series. You mentioned you have it over on Marquise Brown, and that's been another fantastic one. You can find it on 4 for 4, where you've been picking kind of 3 player bets that you love at each position. So far, I think you've got 9 total released between running backs and quarterbacks and wide receivers. Is there like a single one that you're just like, I'm hammering that one? That's my favorite of all the props.
Yeah, I'd have to say Jonathan Taylor is my favorite prop. And I did the math. I'm trying to find it here, but I did the math on what it would take for him to go over his prop of 700.5 rushing yards. And just for instance, 4 for 4 projection, which 4 for 4 has some of the best projections in the industry, has Taylor at 966 yards. So it's not even close. As far as the 700 compared to 966. And so here's what I figured. If he gets about a third of the team's rushes at 4.5 yards per carry, which was the Colts team average last year, he would go over 700. So if he gets 1/3 of their carries, okay, this is a running back drafted in the second round by a team that, for, better or worse, prides itself on, destroying the opponent and running the ball and establishing the run, and they run a lot, and they will continue to, pretty much no matter the game flow, no matter the game script. So that's like worst case scenario, and he still would go over. Now, he gets up to the 45-50% range as far as carries go. He's blowing away that mark, even if he doesn't have a sterling, yards per carry. So, the only way that you could think that he won't go over 700 yards is A, obviously injury, or B, that the team says Marlon Mack is still our guy, and Taylor can come in when Mack needs a breather, or when Mack is injured. That's pretty much the only scenario I could say. I love that prop.
It's too it's too easy. Everything you're saying there is like, I mean, I only see the best case with this guy too. Why would you trade up in round 2 at a position that shouldn't really necessarily be considered a need if you really loved Marlon Mack behind that line nonetheless too? I mean, this guy I loved watching him at Wisconsin. I mean, I think he was probably my favorite running back in this class, and you give him a dreamboat scenario outside Marlon Mack, but let's say that you're saying he only needs 33%. What if that flips and he's the 60% guy and Marlon Mack's the 40% guy?
Right.
It's a no-brainer. Pat Fitzmaurice, one of the best rankers in the game, I think number 2 last year, came on the pod, and his bold prediction of the year was he thinks Taylor's going to lead the league in rushing as a rookie. So, that ceiling's in there, right? Like his floor is far higher than 700 yards, in my opinion.
Sure. I mean, and I would not honestly, I think that is definitely in the range of outcomes. There could be a scenario, and I think I mentioned this in the piece, where Taylor doubles his prop.
Yeah.
Where he goes for 1,400 yards. Yeah.
Absolutely. So yeah, that one to me, I read all your prop ones, and that was the one I circled too.
Thank
So
you.
it's funny we're in agreement to that one. I really like that one.
Thank you.
For sure. I didn't even believe it. Like as soon as I saw
Yeah,
that, it's like, how is that?
I
Because I'm
know.
not even the highest on Taylor as a rookie. And so I hadn't even researched his props, and it's just like, that's it, 700. That's all he has to hit.
Very conservative. Yeah.
Ridiculous. But now we got to get to the your bread and butter, your position, the one
Yeah.
that most want to get rid of in fantasy right now. A lot consider it stream and forget. You can't take him before the last round. The kicker, the most hated position in fantasy from pretty much everyone other than you. And you got a great article called "The Kicker Process." So not only do you love kickers, you have a process behind it. How to
That's
find
right.
fantasy value. It's on 4for4 again. What is the process? What do you do to find a good kicker?
Yeah. So, and just for the record, I'm all about taking a kicker with your last pick of the draft or second to
Yeah.
last. So, I'm definitely not saying, hammer Butker in the ninth. Um, so the process, if I can make it as simple as possible, it's, find a kicker attached to an offense that has a pretty good implied total for the week. If we're just talking about 1 week type things,
Yeah.
a good implied total at home, and their team is favored and or slight underdogs. I'm not crazy about going with kickers on underdog teams, but if it's 1 point, maybe 2 points, it's reasonable. But I would prefer the team is favored, and the reason is because kickers on teams that are favored going into the week have a much better chance of kicking field goals in the second half of the game, because their team is likely not chasing points and can settle for field goals in the third and fourth quarter. So that's roughly the process. Accuracy really doesn't matter unless it's getting ridiculous. Unless we're talking about something under 80%, and also kicker. The length of a kicker's range. Kicker's range doesn't matter either. I see a lot of questions on Sunday morning saying, "Well, so and so's kicking in Denver in the thin air," and I'm like, that's what you want me to project like. This guy kicking a 65-yarder today. I mean, who knows?
Right.
So yeah, I mean, it's as simple as that. You want your kicker to be able to benefit from good game script.
Absolutely. And in that sense, then, I guess, you're kind of taking it that week by week approach, but entering the season, and I know there's another article you wrote about, some late round sleeper kickers. Yeah, late round, they're always the last couple rounds, but still some sleeper kickers and
Yeah.
offenses. Who are some that you're kind of definitely targeting? Is there any that you're avoiding with this process now?
Yeah, I mean, Matt Gay comes to mind. I wrote him up. Koo from Atlanta.
Yeah.
Atlanta with Matt Bryant. They
Yes.
produced, some of the best kicking opportunity, and that's what we're after. We're after opportunity. We don't focus on, on so many, how many kicks are made or how long the kicks are, whatever. We focus on how many attempts they've had. So Matt Bryant for years benefited from the Matt Ryan led offense in Atlanta,
Yeah.
and I think and Koo did last year. Koo was the number one kicker overall for the time in the 6 or 7 week period he was with Atlanta. So I expect that to continue roughly around that kind of pace going into this year. So those are two guys I'm targeting. But I did another piece on actual field goal attempts versus expected field goal attempts from last year. So based on the yardage that a team gains, you would expect a certain amount of field goals. And teams that pop out as regression candidates, teams that will likely attempt a lot more field goals this year, are the Titans,
Yeah.
the Giants, who I guess have a new kicker now, in Catman, right?
Yeah.
Catanzaro.
Catanzaro. Yeah.
Yeah, man, I miss that guy. Actually, I don't, because I remember touting him when he missed like 3 field goals. So, and believe it or not, the Ravens are prime regression candidate for field goal attempts this year, which makes Justin Tucker the pick among the elite kickers. Now, you're probably not going to get a chance, but if you are in a league where people properly value kicker and Tucker is available in the second to last round, along with, say, Will Lutz or something, I would take Tucker for that reason, because he got extremely unlucky last year as far as attempts go. We don't expect that to continue into this year.
And I do some auction drafts too, just like that early nomination at $1 Justin Tucker, and nobody wants to pay up more than $1 for a kicker. So lock him in early, piss everybody off, set a tone to the draft. I think Tucker's a great one to go after. Yeah, is he the number one kicker of 2020 for you?
Yeah, I would say so. I don't do rankings, but yeah, I mean, just based on what I just said, like if him and Butker and Lutz are available for you in the second to last round, even the third to last, depending on the number of rounds, I would lean toward Tucker. Some other teams that I expect to have more field goal attempts this year: the Texans, the Raiders, although the Raiders are probably not going to be good enough to really bank on, and the Seahawks. And the Seahawks Jason Myers got unlucky last year with field goal attempts. So those are all guys who I think could make good picks and might even shape up to be every week starters.
Absolutely. And you suggested, especially towards later rounds, you look at what are some untapped sources of volume or potential sources of volume. And you've got, again, another really good series on 4 for 4. I feel like I keep saying that, on late round tight ends right now, late round sources of volume for tight ends. And you've kind of been picking and choosing. That was the recipe for Mark Andrews, a talented guy that's just got a much higher source of volume than they most expected, even though they kept raving about how he was the MVP in our training camp and the number one target. And all the coach speak ended up coming into fruition there. And a late source of volume at tight end led to one of the single biggest season changers of 2019. You identified a few different guys. Is there one or two you want to highlight here as like the one you feel the strongest about?
Yeah, I highlighted Eric Ebron, Chris Herndon, Blake Jarwin, and CJ Uzama in Cincinnati. The Uzama thing was more based on the volume of plays. I think the Bengals are set to run a lot of plays and throw a lot of passes this season. And Uzama is penciled in as the starting tight end, and he's available. He'll probably be on the waiver wire in 80% of leagues. So, but I think he's someone to keep an eye on. Jarwin, I think, is almost like too obvious of a pick where he's going. I mean, his ADP still in the 12th or 13th round. Jason Witten, who was basically just a statue running routes the last 3 of the past 4 years with Dak Prescott, was seeing 15, 16, 17% target share. Even if Jarwin only got that much, I think you're talking about a major value there. And then for Herndon, the appeal is that, first of all, I didn't know this, but he had the 20th or 21st best fantasy season for a tight end ever, for a rookie tight end ever.
Really?
Does that make sense? Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Rookie tight end, 21st best season ever. Last year was a lost season. I think we can just kind of wipe that away. But the Jets lost more air yards and more targets from last year to this year than any team in the league. So there's a lot of opportunity for him to step in and see opportunity in that offense. I mean, we don't love Adam Gase offenses for tight ends, but you'll take it in the 16th round or whatever.
Absolutely. Now, and there's been a couple seasons. It might be more of a product of Peyton Manning, but I remember Julius Thomas under Gase. Again, probably more so Peyton Manning than Adam Gase there. But there's definitely a handful of. I'm trying to think. There's a couple others I remember pointing to in a few articles I wrote too.
Oh, Jordan Cameron.
Yes, that's the one. Jordan Cameron. That's exactly who it is. Yep. I was thinking of the Browns. I thought Barney, but I was not Barney. Cameron. Yes. So definitely. We're going to now jump to the no-huddle offense. I did want to – we had a little bit of improv planned. Can I throw one at you before we jump into the no-huddle offense? So I did this with Pete Overzet. I know you guys do some hilarious stuff together on Twitter. And this one was my personal favorite of his. So let's see how you handle this one. It's called Industry Stereotypes. And the one I picked here, he knocked it out of the park. the stereotype is, and if you need a minute to kind of think what you want to say, all good, but it is Vinny the film grinder who will die in the honor, defending the honor of running backs and how much they matter.
All right, let me think here.
Yeah.
I think I have to roll up my sleeves. Maybe put a pack of cigarettes in my sleeve. Yeah, I mean, the running back guys are funny because they get so passionate about because it's the nature of the position, you know. And it's like, look at this guy run. He runs through him. He doesn't run around him. He runs through him. He doesn't care about yardage. He just wants domination. You know, that this is sort of extremely high testosterone take on running backs. It's almost like sometimes like I'll watch a running back and I'll think, well, he didn't have to run into that guy. He could have just gone around him and scored, but instead he hits him hard and embarrasses him, but he's down at the 2-yard line. But you know, Vinny would be like, hell yes, that's what you do. It's football. You know, that's that would be my best impression.
Love it. Absolutely. Yeah. That's Pete was saying something like the film. He was really approaching that. Like, how do spreadsheets tell you how the hips swivel? Do the hips swivel on your spreadsheets and stuff? It was fantastic. I was losing it on air while you were saying it. But good. Yeah, I know we got to get rolling here. So do you mind running through this quick, gut reaction, 1 or 2 words? It's called the No-Huddle Offense. You mind running through that with me real quick? All righty, the No-Huddle Offense here. We run every industry wolf through this one. Rapid fire questions to wrap up the show. If you feel like expanding on them, you're welcome to, but kind of just let it rip what name comes to mind. You ready? All righty. After Christian McCaffrey, the number 2 player should be?
Kamara.
Ooh, the next Dalvin Cook or round 2 running back who's going top 5 in 2021 is going to be?
I got to look at ADPs real quick. So wait, the next, okay, so we're talking about round 2 running back.
It's kind of like the Miles Sanders, the Kenyon Drakes, the Ecklers. I'm trying to think. Josh Jacobs goes there sometimes. Hilaire.
Okay. Shoot. Oh man, that's tough. I'm gonna go with. Yeah, I'll go with Eckler. Sure. I think Eckler is around for the long haul fantasy wise.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Do you have a favorite fantasy team name that you either had or you've seen in another league?
There are some. I mean, I'm always a fan of the crude ones.
Yes.
The one that I had that I shared with Living the Stream listeners once, so it was more embarrassing than I ever could have dreamed. For some reason, I named my first fantasy team the Maryland Mediocres, which is the nerdiest, lowest T thing I've ever done in my life.
Just the Mediocres.
The Mediocres. You know, I mean, like what I don't even know what I was thinking. Like I'm going to be self-deprecating, guys. I'm going to call my team the Mediocres.
Right. If you're going to self-deprecate, at least go like real hard, just mediocre. Yeah. Just right in the middle of that's fantastic. Right. I'll be okay. The next Chris Godwin or round 4 or 5 kind of wide receiver who then explodes into the elite would be.
Man, I forgot that. Did he go in the 4th or 5th round last year?
Yeah, he was falling to 4, not 5th usually by the time like real drafts were happening, but round 4. Man. So yeah,
that's wild. AJ Brown. Yeah. I mean, you know. I was looking at, thinking about Metcalf, but no, I mean the nature of the Seahawks offense, and then I was thinking about DJ Moore, but no, it's Brown.
2020's Mark Andrews. Well, we kind of just talked about that, or breakout tight end. Which of the ones do you say is going to be that next big breakout?
Yeah, I know we just talked about Herndon. I really feel like he is the prototypical post-hype sleeper. Last year people were hungry to draft him in seasonal leagues and then stash him for some unholy reason. I have no idea why anybody would do that with a tight end. I mean, if you're talking about one tight end league, Right. But I think it could be him. I also honestly, we've seen Eric Ebron do it. Mm-hmm. Like we've seen Eric Ebron come from the depth to be a plugged-in fantasy starter. And I know, he kind of gimps around the field and it's kind of ugly, but I think that he has a chance of really producing in that Pittsburgh offense.
Absolutely. Who is your most hated NFL player? And it's ideally for a fantasy specific
Hmm.
reason.
Current
It could be
or
current. It could be past. You
yeah,
can go either
okay.
way. If there's someone that just fills you with the most rage possible.
Right. I see. So I don't think I've ever really emotionally recovered from a Jordy Nelson drop in I don't want to say 2014 against Buffalo. Aaron Rodgers threw a bullet, hit him in the hands, hitting Jordy Nelson in the hands. Nelson would have been gone for an 85+ yard touchdown,
Oh.
and it would have. I mean, for me, just speaking from what I was doing that day, I would have won my semifinals in 2 leagues that I eventually lost if he would have just hung on to just a very simple pass and a pitch and catch, as Steve Spurrier would say, pitch and catch, and he dropped it. And I'm still all these years later, I'm still recovering.
Oh, man, that is painful, especially when it's more than one league too, like that. That's brutal.
Yeah, man.
If there was somehow another Lamar Jackson or Pat Mahomes this year, it would be.
That's a hard one.
Oh yeah.
Ooh, baby. I mean, I want to say Joe Burrow.
Mm.
I kind of like that Cincinnati offense. Like I feel like picking up pieces of that offense is not going to be terrible. I mean, there's always Josh Allen. He's going in the 9th, I suppose. But I mean, you need someone who's going to explode, either completely just crush teams through the air, or have a lot of rushing yardage, a lot of Konami code. So I think Burrow can have that going for him.
Absolutely.
I'll go with him.
I like it. What early rounder, first or second, is going to bust the hardest?
Love is a family show. So I really do think that people confidently taking Kenyon Drake at the end of the first round are putting a lot of confidence in the fact that he's going to be like the guy throughout the season for Arizona. When I mean, he had a nice run. Yeah, he had a nice run last year. I just don't know if I'm ready to like go in on him in that situation. I think that he jumps out as one who could definitely be a bust. Another one, and this is purely because of his backfield mate, is Nick Chubb.
Who do you think? Oh yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna go right on because I know I feel bad. It took so much of your time here.
No, it's fine.
I want to keep firing through them. But yeah, who do you think gained the most value in the 2020 offseason?
Right. Good question. I think gained the most value. I'm sorry. I should have really looked at these before.
No worries.
I mean, Adam Thielen gained a bunch. I really think that his target ceiling in that offense, especially if the Vikings struggle a little bit and can't really establish like they like to. I mean, he could be top 3, 4 in targets in the league come year's end.
Absolutely. And which middle round guy, rounds 5 through 7 or so, you won't leave those middle rounds without blank?
I always like that. It's always a fun time of year when you say, I'm not leaving the draft without this player. And then someone takes them 2 rounds ahead of their ADP and you're like, yeah. But what can you do? I do have a player. I find myself not being able to pass up DJ Chark in the 5th round. He just really, really looks like a guy who could benefit from just a ton of negative game script, a ton of Gardner Minshew just dropping back and flinging it downfield to him. And a potentially very heavily targeted player who's being drafted. I mean, you just look where he's being drafted. He's after DK Metcalf. I mean, Chark could see 30 more targets than Metcalf this year.
Do you ever play the board game Settlers of Catan?
I've heard of it, never played it.
I'm like 0 for 20 on that one.
Uh,
The next sophomore wide receiver after or even before AJ Brown, who would you take?
McLaurin.
Everybody's saying him. That's a very common name. What do you think? Target hogs or workhorse backs? What do you prefer?
I'm going to change my McLaurin answer. I'm sorry. I want to go with Cortland Sutton.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
On that one. So your question again?
Target hogs or workhorse backs? What do you prefer?
So target hog receivers versus workhorse backs?
Yes.
I mean, it really does depend. If you're talking about like a standard league where you can only start 2 receivers, I'm probably leaning toward the workhorse. If you're talking about a PPR where you can start 3 or 4 receivers in a given week, I'm going with the receiver.
What about Alvin Kamara, James Conner, Austin Eckler? They were all top 5 running backs that you could get after round 7 or 8. Do you see anybody this year that could be the next one of those?
Usually it requires an injury, but we can't obviously project those. I guess the natural one is Dobbins. That's the one that I would think could happen easily without an injury. Yeah, I'll go with Dobbins.
Love it. What is your ideal league settings?
Yeah, PPR forever and ever. No half measures with half PPR. And no caveman leagues with standard scoring.
Oh God, yeah.
And I prefer 3 wide receivers. I prefer a flex, at least one flex, honestly. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And of course, it must have a kicker spot. If it doesn't have a kicker spot, I'm out.
After Michael Thomas and Devontae Adams, owners should take blanket wide receiver.
God, I want Adams everywhere. Yeah. I want Tyreek after those 2 for sure.
Out of all the coaching moves, who was the most important hire, and who do you think is going to be most impacted by that hire?
I'm kind of, it might be recency bias because I spent a lot of today looking at the Browns offense, but it might be the Browns' new coach, Stefanski. Am I saying that right?
I think so. Stefanski.
Because, he's going to bring a faster pace to that offense. That offense just basically won't be nearly as dysfunctional as it was last year. It was barely operating at like a professional level at some points during the season. It even had the Browns even had a slow pace when they were down late in games. If you look at the stats on that, so I think that faster pace, more plays, more chances, and I think that more chances to go downfield to OBJ, and I think a healthy OBJ in that offense with some downfield pass regression coming his way, I think that he would be the most heavily impacted by the new coaching, the new offensive system.
Do running backs matter?
Well, I really like to say running back doesn't matter because I don't want to dehumanize the people playing running backs, and I'm all about running backs getting paid. I love to see when a team says, we love the running back, we love you, we're giving you $100 million. That's great. I always want to see that. So running back definitely doesn't matter though. And we see that over and over and over again. Like, I'm the most recent great example would be CJ Anderson, stepping off the street into the Rams backfield and being dominant. And so yeah, and the game, the way that the game is today, and the way the league has made the game today, the position certainly doesn't matter. And you see teams recognizing that now, for better or worse.
And last 2 here. What is the funniest either last place punishment, side bet, if you've ever seen one that you're like, that was a great one that listeners should consider for their own leagues?
I did see someone had to read War and Peace and do a book report on it.
Oof.
And that's a heavy
That
list.
is.
I've never read it. I don't think I would ever dream of trying to read it. But yeah, that's a tough punishment. I'm not a fan of the punishment thing in fantasy leagues, especially if it's like something like, oh, you got to wear a dress and stand out on the corner or something. That's not, that's not cool.
Right.
And or like the tattoo ones. I mean, you got to just be out of your mind to agree to that. Although I do have draft day consultant clients come to me sometimes and say, there's a terrible punishment for last place in my league. I need you to make sure I don't finish last. I mean, and I'm sorry, they'll come to me in week 12 and say this.
Yeah.
And I'll say, and they're in last. I'm like, oh, okay, what's the punishment? And they'll actually tell me, I can't tell you. And I'm like,
it must be horrible.
wait, are they gonna like kidnap your family or something? And so I'm not a huge fan of that. But yeah, the War and Peace one's pretty rough.
And last one, your boldest 2020 fantasy prediction, and then you just remind our listeners where they can kind of find you and connect and see your work.
Boldest 2020 prediction is that Teddy Bridgewater will be a top 12 quarterback.
Love it.
And I wrote about him for Roto World if folks would like to check that out. And then you can check me out at cdcarter13 on the Twitter. And Living the Stream is the podcast I do with JJ. We have a Patreon with lots of hashtag content, if that's your thing.
Awesome. And of course, the draft day consultants, especially in one of these crazy seasons, as we talked about earlier. CD, thank you so much, Denny, for all the time you gave me today. Your thoughtful answers. Everything was fantastic. It was an absolute pleasure, my man. Really appreciate having you on.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.